Hello, hello. Welcome to Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Ann Hince. She is an author, a public speaker, and a spiritual teacher. She shares the story of how she has shifted her skull bones and grown 3/4 of an inch as a result of her search for inner peace. And she wants you to know that if she has done it, you can too. Thank you so much for being here. I'm definitely intrigued about your bio, and I'm sure anyone listening is kind of tilted their head to the side and probably is curious themselves. So let's dig right into the meat and potatoes of what brings you to Grieving Voices.
Okay, thanks for having me, Victoria. It's great to be here. Yes, I think I would be a little surprised if I heard that too, like 20 years ago, because I didn't know what I can do now was possible. But it started by releasing the trauma and releasing the grief from all my childhood traumas, including finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19. So that's where it started, but I just my self-awareness deepened as I went through the process of releasing all that trauma, all that burden that I'd been carrying, and I just kept going deeper and deeper to a place where now I can put my awareness inside the connective tissue, inside my skull, and I can release tension stored in there, and I can actually hear and feel the release. It sounds, it's like a chiropractor making adjustments, or it sounds like fabric ripping, that I'm releasing the tension in the connective tissue. So it's allowed me to kind of adjust my body or realign my body. I just didn't know this was something that was possible. And it all started with the grief.
Let's rewind the clock to your childhood before you found your mother. What were the grief experiences that kind of made that loss of your mother the pinnacle?
Well, there were multiple. I mean, it started off with actually my birth, because I was born with my right foot up against my right shin. So I had
Oh.
kind of physical therapy for the first 6 weeks of my life. And after that, after my foot was back to normal somewhat, I was handed over for adoption. And I was handed over for adoption into a family that had already suffered a loss, because they had, well, multiple losses actually, but they had adopted a little boy. So they had, my adopted brother, who was 2 years older than me. But then they adopted another little girl, and they had her for quite a while. I don't know how long, but back in England at that point, the birth mother could change her mind up to 6 months. And the birth mother did change her mind. So they
Mm.
had to hand that little girl back to her mother. And I was the replacement in the family for that loss. So I
like
think,
like we
as
often replace puppies, right? When we lose when a dog dies, well, we'll just go get a new one, right? So you were the
right.
replacement, huh?
Yeah. And I think, excuse me, after a loss like that, as a mother, I think you don't tend to get as connected to the replacement child, just in case the birth mother does that
Mm.
again, right? So, again, after 6 months, my birth mother did not change her mind, so they kept me. And then we started traveling around the world because my dad worked for an international company. So we moved to Barbados and then to Sierra Leone in West Africa. And while we were there, we had a house fire. And I was the one who woke up and found the flames coming through my bedroom wall. So I was the one that alerted everyone. And as part
How
of
old were
that
you?
process, I actually went to the top of the stairs. I was about 3 or 4, maybe.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
went to the top of the stairs and called down to my dad, who was in the kitchen. And I said, "There's a fire in my bedroom." And my dad said, "No, I don't believe you." Or, "There can't be." "No, there can't be." Which, which as a child, as an adult, it sounds like, well, that's kind of a reasonable thing to say. But as a child, that starts you not believing yourself, right? Something I
Mhm.
said, which was clearly true, right? No child would make something like that up, was disbelieved by someone who's supposed to be the person who protects you. So, that started its whole, you know, roller coaster in its own. But then, life carried on. So we moved from there, we moved to Hong Kong. And when I was in Hong Kong at the age of 9, I was sent to boarding school in England. And I was sent to my brother's boarding school, which was a boys' boarding school. So for my first year, I was the only girl boarder at this boys' boarding school.
And they allowed it? Like that
They
was
did.
allowed?
They did. They had day girls who would come, for lessons during the day and then go home. And my bedroom was in sick bay. That was my bedroom. And I was teased mercilessly by those boys. It was horrific. It was so bad. So that was a big part of that trauma. And then in my teenage years, both my parents became alcoholics. So life at home was hell in my mind. That's what I call it. It's like it's just hell. And then my mother got cancer. We didn't talk about it. We talked about it one time when we found out she had cancer. We found out it was too late to do anything. So we never talked about it again, which is, looking back, it's very odd, but that is the way my family behaved. We just didn't talk about anything deep at all. And then I woke up one morning when I was 19 and found her dead on the bathroom floor. So at that point, I was the only one in the house. My brother, who was 2 years older, 21, was at his girlfriend's house. And my dad was working in Saudi Arabia. And we were back in England. So I was the only one in the house, and I had to tell everyone else what had happened. And it was, yeah, it was pretty bad.
In all the years I've been doing this podcast and all of the examples of grief that I've had, there have been house fires mentioned, but it's like, let this be a reminder to you listening of the grief that people experience is so vast, and you just never know what people have experienced in their lives at first glance. And it just sounds like your entire childhood was just a cesspool of grief and trauma. And so I'm so sorry for you that that was your experience. And I don't say that to like pour you pity as pity, but it's like I firmly believe, because my childhood wasn't the best either, but and I'm not comparing, and we don't want to compare, but I think those experiences are what create who we who we become, and we have a lot of say and choice in that. And so I commend you for sitting here and having this conversation with me, to getting to this place that you have, despite all of those experiences
Thank
of
you. Yeah, I mean, it's
feeling.
interesting, right? If people hear like the outside of my childhood, oh, I lived in Barbados, in West Africa, and Hong Kong, and right, it sounds exciting. It sounds amazing. But once you open the lid, you go underneath, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that really weren't that great. So absolutely, it made me who I am today. But I didn't realize until I was in my late 30s that it was affecting me, right? Until I had two young boys,
Mm-hmm.
and the boys were growing up, right? And they were
Mm-hmm.
coming towards that age that those boys at my boarding school were. I was scared of boys of the age 9 through 13 because of what they had done to me. And I didn't want to be afraid of my sons. So I knew I had to change because it was getting too close.
Well, and our children have a way of kind of opening up our wounds and insecurities and all of those things that we've suppressed.
Absolutely. Yes, it's part of the benefits of parenthood for sure. Yes, they trigger us in so many ways.
What was your experience? Because I'm curious of, because I imagine growing up, did you know that you were adopted from a very young age?
I didn't know until I was 13.
Oh my gosh, at
And I met
boarding school.
and I met my mother when I was 17, my birth mother. She's still alive actually in New Zealand. And my adopted mother died when I was 19. So yes, it was kind of like this 2-year overlap where I had two mothers and then kind of reverted back to my birth mother. It was a very strange story.
Okay, so can you share a little bit about how that experience went of finding out that you were adopted?
It was pretty wild. My mind just started to play with all these different possibilities. What could have life been like? Because it was not very much fun in that moment, right? It was hell. And I just imagining all these different possibilities. Um, it was, yeah, it was difficult because I wanted to know more. And thankfully, I didn't have to wait that long. Right? I only had to wait 4 years to find out that actually my birth mother was pretty normal, which was really nice to know. um, so yeah, it was tricky. It was tricky for both of us because my brother didn't know either, and he was
Mm.
15 at the time.
But how did you find out? Like, I'm curious, like, did you ask
Oh, right.
questions?
No, we were moving back to the same place that we had lived, like a little
Mm.
tiny village that we had lived when we'd been adopted. And my mother was afraid that someone would say something.
Mm.
So, yeah, it makes you wonder if that hadn't happened when or whether they would have told us at all. Because, we didn't look that alike, but we didn't look that different. We all had kind of the same color hair, so it wasn't it wasn't totally obvious.
But it wasn't something you had questioned, like,
I had
or did
questioned
you
it a
have?
little bit only because I was pretty nosy and had looked through a lot of my mother's papers. And
Mm.
I thought I had found something that said my brother was adopted. So then
Oh,
I thought, okay, well, he's adopted, but I'm not. So it
did
was a
he know?
surprise. I think he had seen the same paper. So he had questioned it. Yes. And we were so, I mean, physically we didn't look that different, but emotionally, intellectually, we were very different. Yeah.
So, in knowing then at such a influential age, right? 13, it's preteen, and having been at boarding school and all of your life experience up to that point, which I imagine, and moving so much, right? Like, it's really difficult to create connections with people. And then to find out you're adopted, and it's like, does that make you question your connection with your parents and then your your brother? And so, what role did connection play as you into your young adulthood and eventually meeting someone and having your own children? I'm just curious how that path kind of evolved.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of connection. And you're right, when you move so much, especially back in those days without cell phones and social media, right? You'd make friends in one place and then you'd move to another place and they were gone and you had to start all over again. So I did not have much connection with my parents. Um, my dad is now what you'd call a narcissist. I mean, it was all about him. He was always right. You couldn't question him. And then he was an alcoholic. He would just drink all the time. So there was no connection there, and not really with my mother either. So yeah, there wasn't really much connection with anyone. For some reason, I kind of lucked on my husband. It was some connection that just happened. I kind of knew that he was for me, and that's when I was 18. He actually met my mother before she died. So, and we're still together. So yeah, I'm not quite sure how that connection happened and how it stayed. I think it was kind of meant to be.
What was your spiritual life like at that point?
It wasn't any. There was nothing. I mean, I questioned things. I'd been brought up in the Church of England. I hated it. It was part of the boarding school life, right? You had to go to church on the weekends. So religion was out. I hated it. And, I questioned spirituality. I thought about things possibly deeper than some other people that I know, but it was just it was not really a part of my life. I was a software engineer, I worked
Very
in Silicon
analytical.
Valley, yes, but I was also an artist. So I kind of had more of a balance, I think, than a lot of people. But yeah, nothing really hit home until my late 30s. I think I was just supposed to go through all that and just be scared all the time and have PTSD and just I had to go through that until I had this experience that kind of woke me up.
Do you remember the moment?
Yeah, it was kind of a 3 day moment. it was it was what I call a business altercation with two other mothers at my boys' school. And these mothers were not like me. I was the scared mother on the inside always. And they were self confident, self assured, authority type women in my mind.
Mm.
So, in some senses, a little bit like my dad, but they told me I'd done something wrong. And I could not stop my mind spinning. It just went over and over and over, like everything I'd said, everything I'd done, everything they'd said, all the things I could have done differently, just all these different permutations. And I couldn't sleep for 3 days. And it was the end of that period of time that I realized, okay, first of all, this is not normal. Most people would not react this intensely to something that really wasn't a big deal. I also realized it felt a little bit like how I would react in childhood when my dad would tell me I'd done something wrong. So that was the first little opening, little inkling that maybe something from my childhood was still affecting me. And so that was the beginning. That's what made me start looking.
What was the first thing you uncovered for yourself?
Well, I didn't really know what to do, right? I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. So I happened to go to a doctor's appointment in that time frame. I don't remember why I went to him. It was nothing to do with emotions or memories or anything like that. But he recognized I was more stressed than I should have been. And he was a holistic physician, right? So he had more
Ooh.
tools in his toolbox than most doctors do. And he recognized I was more stressed. So he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 what my stress level was, right? Thinking it shouldn't be that high because I was a stay at home mother with two healthy young boys. Parenthood is difficult, but it shouldn't have been that stressful. And I said it was an 8 out of 10. And then he asked me why. And it was that question that made me realize, oh, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19, because the tears from that event were still just under the surface all these years later because I had not dealt with it. So he happened to know this technique that's called EFT, short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping. Are you familiar with it?
I am.
Okay, so he tapped with me in that office there for about 15 minutes, talking through finding my mother on the bathroom floor and not having talked about the cancer and all those different aspects. And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story in my mind for the first time ever without the emotions there. And that's when I realized, oh, we just hold those emotions and those memories physically in our body and we can let them go. And that was eye-opening for me. And that was the first step on my journey.
So, what was the next step?
Well, I went home that day and I went online and I learned everything I could about EFT because, as I said, I was a software engineer. I like to know things worked before I spent a lot of time invested in it. And it was really nice to know the guy who developed it, Gary Craig. He was a chemical engineer, so that gave me more confidence. And he gave it away for free, so anyone could go online and learn about it. And that was just amazing to me. So I learned everything I could about it, but I wanted to try it out. I didn't necessarily believe that 15 minutes with this doctor was really, maybe it was a fluke. I wanted to know for sure that it worked. So at the time, I had a 17-year-old cat at home. His kidneys were starting to fail, and we'd been told we had to give him a daily saline shot, like an injection of saline solution. And I hated needles. I'd had so many from living all over the world, I just was petrified of them. So the first time I gave him that shot, my hand was shaking so badly. I didn't want to have to do it every day. It wasn't going to happen. So I thought, okay, well, let me try out this technique. I've learned about it. Let me actually put it in action. So I did. I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting the cat. And I tapped about all the memories from all the injections I'd had in different places around the world, ones in boarding school in the different countries. And the next day, when I gave him the shot, the needle just slid right in. All that fear that had been living inside of me the day before had totally disappeared. And that's when I realized that's the freedom I want. I want to get beyond all those emotions and I want to just feel that peace that I felt at that moment.
Mhm.
So that's when I started using EFT every day. I started noticing when I was emotional during the day, and then I would tap and bring myself back to peace. And, the days went by and I started to notice that I was feeling more peaceful, but I wanted it to go faster. I wanted it more and I wanted it faster. So what I did is I wrote down every emotional memory I could think of from my childhood. Like, so all the traumas, the big traumas, the little traumas, the sayings my dad would say, like, the one they used back in those days, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Mm-hmm.
Or my
It's
aunt
still
always used to
used.
say, oh, it's a shame. My aunt used to say, shame on you. That was one of her favorite sayings. And so I tapped through all of those, one each night for about an hour to an hour and a half each night. So, because I was determined to change. And just things started changing more rapidly. I was just becoming less reactionary, which was really nice. I was more peaceful. And when I was more peaceful, my household was more peaceful, which was really, really nice. So that's kind of the first step on my journey.
Well, I can see that there was ripples in what you were learning and uncovering for yourself and just how you were changing, your environment was changing. How did that evolve over time then?
Well, we hear that phrase, you've got to change yourself, and when you change yourself, your world changes. So, I mean, that is absolutely true. So, as time went by, my boys became more peaceful, and they hadn't been totally not peaceful before, but because I was so reactionary, right? I would react to them, and then they would react to me reacting, right? So, if I'm peaceful and I don't react to something that happens, then they don't have to react to that. So they can feel free to be their true selves. And it just changes the whole dynamic of the family. And it's really nice to experience. But, I talk to people sometimes, they don't believe that that's the case. So you actually have to walk down that path somewhat, right? So you have to realize, you have to be able to look back and see where you came from to see
Mm-hmm.
where you are now. So you have some perspective. And then you could realize that it's true, that it's really the case, right? So if you haven't done any inner work before, you might not believe that things change. You actually have to do some of the work to really believe that it does work.
How did that experience and learning EFT change your spirituality then? Because where you had none and you didn't really have a faith practice and things like that, how did that start to change?
Well, that kind of grew over time as what I realized EFT is doing is opening up the subconscious mind, which is really our body, it's stored in our body. And as our subconscious mind opens, it's kind of one and the same thing. Our self awareness deepens. So when I started this journey, I had so many barriers around me, like emotional barriers, protective barriers, shields, that I really didn't know how I felt. I didn't have any self awareness. And as I did more and more tapping, more and more EFT, I became aware of my emotions, right? Because I'd been checking on myself multiple times a day. And underneath that, the next layer of self awareness is the physical sensations underneath the emotions. So, for example, if we're feeling frustration, right, that's just a word. But what we're really describing is tension that we're holding in our body in a certain place that we give the name frustration to, right? So this is kind of reversing that process. So when I'm feeling frustrated, I can feel tension in the bottom of my rib cage in the solar plexus area. So I became aware at that level. And then I started to use a different technique. I call it feeling your feelings. But I could only do it because I was aware of those sensations. And I had honed my ability to focus. So I could focus on those sensations and just keep my focus there until it released. And so this is kind of what I talk about as the second step on my journey. It's it's just a deeper level of self-awareness. And I will get back to the spirituality. This is a this is a process. As I said, I have this engineering mind, so I had to experience it myself first in order to put words to it and really understand what was happening. So I would do that more and more. Instead of doing EFT, if I felt myself feeling some kind of emotion, I would just stop and feel those emotions, feel those sensations, and allow them to release. It felt actually really good. And so I would lay on the sofa and I would bring, at this point, collective traumas to mind because I'd worked through my childhood. So I'd bring things like 9/11 to mind, right? We all had our own individual experience of that collective trauma. So I would feel all those sensations and allow them to release. And at some point, I became able to put my awareness inside my body after the tension had released. So imagine if you have a toothache or a stomach ache, right? You can feel where that's coming from, right? You can tell where the pain is coming from. Well, once the pain has released, right? Once the toothache or the stomach ache is gone, you can't put your awareness back on it because there's nothing calling your attention to it anymore. I could. I could feel inside my body. And what I realized I was doing eventually was, how do I put it? Well, it's what I think of it is the original meaning of the term insight, right? It's inward sight or inside sight. And it was not me, right? There were two parts of me at that point. There was my body, and there was part of me that was looking inside. So I couldn't be my body if I could also be focusing at one particular place inside my body, right? So that's when I realized we are two separate entities. We're the body and the soul. And there's something we tune into as well, which I believe is, spirit. It's whatever we want to call it, but we're tuning into something using our instrument of the body. So that's when I really started to become more interested in, the spirituality aspect of it, because I knew without a doubt that I was not my body, which is something you hear a lot, but when you actually know it, you really know it because it can't be anything else, then it becomes more interesting. So I started reading more spiritual texts, trying to relate my experience with what some of those spiritual texts talk about. And I found that I could relate to some of it. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
And what that brings to my mind is the thought of consciousness and the controversy or the not controversy. I don't even know how to
The
say it, but like
hard
there's
problem. I think they call it the hard problem.
well, there's people that believe that, either you believe that consciousness continues after you die, after you are no longer in the body, right? Like your soul is not in the body. And that's what comes to mind when I hear you talking is that it's you're connecting with your higher consciousness. It's
Right.
a connection of yeah, it's being an observer, a neutral observer of the body.
Right. So let me go a little further into this third step. The third step is when I was put my awareness inside my body, and it was really wild when it started happening because I knew it felt different. I knew it was different from what I was doing before, but I'd also never heard anyone talk about it. So it was just an exploratory investigation for me. It was kind of fun, actually. And so I would put my focus inside my body and I would move my awareness around and I would find a place with tension, which I could tell was different from a place with no tension. So I'd find a place with tension, I'd focus on it and allow it to release, which is exactly the same thing I was doing with the feelings, right? I was feeling the sensations and allowing them to release. And even with EFT, we're feeling what the words bring up as we tap and we're focusing on it and we're allowing to release. So I'm just working at a deeper level of self awareness. So I would do this in my torso, and it took me many, many months. And then I was able to put my awareness inside my head, which for me was eye opening because the pain and the tension inside my left cheek was almost unbearable. I could only focus on it for like a second at a time because it was just so intense. And what I realized, it had been there my whole life and it was attached through the connective tissue to my right foot, which had been up against my shin when I was born. Right? So the fascia or the connective tissue had not been released. The tension in it had not been released, and it was still tense all the way up through my right leg, over to the left side of my body, into my left cheek, and through tension in the right of my neck. So I realized at that point how everything is so connected. Our body is so connected through the
And for
connective tissue.
and for people listening, because they might be confused now, because you talked about your left foot, but then or your right
Right
foot, but
foot.
then it was the left side. So
Yeah,
just
the
explain that a
connective
little bit. I
tissue.
know what it
Yeah.
means, but can you just elaborate for people who may be hearing that and be like, well, how does that? You would think it'd be on the same side. So can you just explain that a little bit?
Right. Well, the connective tissue, if you look online, the connective tissue just is connected throughout our whole body and kind of through sheets. If you think of pulling the skin off a piece of chicken breast. It's that kind of watery, slimy tissue between that holds the two together. We have that tissue throughout our bodies. It's all connected. That's why it's called connective tissue. So it's connected throughout our body. So from my left cheek, it's connected all the way across my body down through my right leg. But it could potentially also be my left leg all the way up through my left cheek. It just depends where that tension has been held in the body and how it's been held. So it's really, I mean, it was really interesting, right, to know that, okay, if I'm working on my right foot, I don't actually necessarily have to work on my right foot, right? Working on this pain in my left cheek is also working on my right foot because it's releasing the tension all the way through the body. So I started doing that. I started focusing on that pain in my left cheek for just longer and longer periods of time, just holding my awareness on it, allowing it to release over and over again. And that's why one day I actually heard and felt this release of the connective tissue. It was actually kind of scary at the time because it felt like something ripping, and I actually stopped what I was doing because I was afraid I was hurting myself. I had to do some research and realize, okay, it's just a connection it's an adhesion in the connective tissue, and it's okay. So I kept doing that, and over and over and over again, I'd feel releases in different places, and I actually felt my skull bones relax at some point. Now I hadn't known they weren't relaxed until they relaxed, right? Then I could feel, okay, they clearly had been tense before and they needed to relax. And that's when I had x-rays taken 2 years ago, and I actually could see the changes that had happened, that my eye sockets had aligned, my jaw had aligned, my neck was straighter than it had ever been in my life. But I also, at that point, because I was working in my head, I worked out, well, if I'm looking at somewhere inside my head, where am I looking from? Right? Because I could tell I was looking from somewhere to somewhere else. So I tried to work it out. Are my eyes above or below where I'm looking from? Whereabouts does it feel like it's in the middle of my head? So I kind of worked out the general area, and it's kind of between my eyes, right? If you're looking from the front, it's between my eyes, kind of between the eyebrows, maybe a little bit lower than
The
that.
third eye
Yeah,
chakra.
maybe the crown chakra, maybe a little bit lower. It's not the pineal gland. It's not that far back. So what I think it is, and this is based on looking at a lot of um, symbology in different places, but I believe it is the sphenoid bone, the body of the sphenoid bone that I'm looking from, and I can relate that to many different things that I've read in different spiritual texts. And so that's where I believe the soul resides. So that's when I think, like during near-death experiences and such, when you go through a dark tunnel, I think you're coming out of the sphenoid sinus effect, in effect, through the nose and out through out through the body. But I haven't been able to really determine that. I've talked to some people who've had near-death experiences and some people who've been on ayahuasca and such things, to try and relate that my belief with their experience, and some kind of relate to that and some don't necessarily. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, I would say it is what you believe it is.
Well, maybe, but I'm not, that's another part of this journey. It's like some people, when I talk to some people, they think I'm going into my imagination to experience this. I'm not. I'm out of my thinking mind. I'm in my feeling mind. So I'm actually feeling things inside. I'm feeling inside my bones. I'm feeling inside, my palate, inside my neck bones, inside my tooth roots. I can actually feel them move, right? So it's not what I believe it is. It's what it actually is, right? That's hard for me to say because I know people don't necessarily believe that. But it's a very different experience to actually know versus believe versus
Well, our
think.
beliefs create our reality.
Right, but I'm not sure I ever believed, in my
Oh, I
past
get what you're saying.
56 years, I
Yep,
didn't
I get what you're saying.
believe where it was coming from. Yeah,
True. I get
right.
what you're saying. you know, I think it sounds like too what you're experiencing is something that people could experience. I've experienced really deep, profound meditations, visualizations, meditations, and I think we can have a similar experience if we allow ourselves to completely relax to that place of where we connect to our higher consciousness and let our higher consciousness give us whatever it is that we are needing to receive, messages or visions or insights, right? To allow our third eye to really open and receive. And how I've personally seen my third eye in visualizations or meditations, it's almost like I'm like in a UFO in a way where and I'm seeing my life and seeing me on like a TV screen, except it's like, it's an all white and glass front. And it's almost like I'm just like on this observation deck, or, like, as you can see like, uh, air traffic controllers, kind of like that, where you're just observing yourself, in that our minds can take us to incredible places and are very powerful. And I think as our minds and brains change with trauma, right, we can create those new connections and new experiences within the mind that can transform and transcend the experiences we feel within our bodies. And that really sounds like it's almost like you've little by little have incrementally uh, leveled up on a cellular level.
Yeah, well, Kundalini with energy was part of that journey too. So yeah, I definitely think my cells changed. So what you're talking about there is kind of, it is kind of in the mind, right? You're talking about going into deep meditation or visualizations where you're kind of seeing things in the mind. Yeah, it's really hard to put these things in word, right? I don't
Mhm.
do that anymore. I go into the body. So I'm not creating things in my thinking mind, or even another part of the mind that does visualization. I'm actually going into the body and sensing tension.
No,
It's,
but we
it's
can do that. That's what I'm saying. Like we can become so relaxed that we can almost, and I think that experience would be different and unique for every individual, but how I would feel, how I would see myself, or how I've done that myself, is like seeing myself as like this miniature version of myself going into the body, right? Like that's what I
uh-huh.
mean. It's like and then it's like you're seeing with your third eye in this visualization, you're seeing what the body wants to communicate to. I think there's so
Right,
many ways we can do this. You know what I
right.
mean? That's what
But
I'm
I'm
saying.
saying that this is different from that,
Yeah.
right? Because I've experienced that before.
Mm-hmm.
You're still creating an image. This is sensing, right? If you put your awareness on your right knee right now, right, and just feel, how does your right knee feel? When you do that, and the moment you do that, you're sensing. You're not putting a picture to it. You might put words to it eventually, but before you do that, there's a moment where you're just feeling it. Yeah, got it?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what
Okay.
I'm saying. I'm fast forwarding the reel a little bit, because I think it's how you get there, right? It's like how you can get to that deep sensing. And if you have to use visualization you can use visualization or deep meditation to get to that deep sensing. If
Yes,
there's,
possibly.
like, uh, what's his name? He broke his back.
Joe
He was,
Dispenza.
yes, thank you, Joe Dispenza.
You're
I've
welcome.
I've used his meditations, and it is deep sensing, but there's also visualization that's incorporated into that. And that's what I'm saying, like, a lot of people need help getting to get to the point where they're
Right.
deeply
I
relaxed, and
couldn't do
that's.
it until I had released a lot of the outer layers of trauma, right? The outer emotions.
And that's where you're saying EFT was a huge
Right, that
proponent.
was the
Yeah.
first part. It took all those big layers away, all those emotions that allowed me to sense deeper. And then feeling the feelings just allowed me to sense deeper. So I think with Joe Dispenza, you're focusing on one particular place and not necessarily clearing everything else out around it. Right? It's kind of a different way. I mean, if I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but I've met him before, and if you experience him, he doesn't feel like he's a particularly happy, light person. He still kind of feels heavy. So
Mm.
I would say that is because he's definitely done a lot of inner work, right? And he's focused deeply in certain areas, but I don't think that the whole of it's been cleared out. Just I can only say that because I've experienced it. I used to feel really heavy. I used to feel just so burdened all the time, and I've experienced the difference. Right, I'm not like that anymore. I feel, to me, I feel lighter, I feel happier, more at peace. Right, and I've cleared out many layers all the way through my body, not just in a certain specific places, right? So I would say that's the difference that's allowed me to get inside and move around at will rather than just go into one particular place. Yeah.
You mentioned Kundalini too,
Uh-huh.
and I had a session with a Kundalini practitioner, Kundalini yoga, and she walked me through this breath work experience, and it's like I have never experienced anything like it, like where every cell in my entire body just felt like it was vibrating. It's anyone listening, you want to feel alive, like whoa, it was quite an experience.
Yeah, it's a massive energy. I mean, in my experience, it was just a massive energy. It felt like other people around me should. I mean, why aren't they feeling it too? Because it was just so big. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, it happens just as part of the process, right? I'd released enough energy myself. It took over. Almost what I feel is it took over to allow the rest of my body to catch up with the parts that had released enough tension. So it went on for months, on and off. I could kind of move it up and down my body at will. I could stop it whenever I wanted. I just have to relax sufficiently, and then it would start up again. And I would relax more up into my spine, and it would move up. It was kind of fun, actually. But at some point, it got to the place where, I had released enough, or it had burnt through enough of remaining tension that it just kind of faded away. And it was actually at that point that I was able to put my awareness inside my body. So I think that was part of the process.
Did you get to the third part?
Yeah, that third part was putting my awareness inside my body.
So how has your life changed since?
Oh, it's lovely. I'm really very peaceful. When I started this journey, I used to love seeing peaceful parents at school. It was so nice. I wanted to be one of them. And one day, a few years into this process, I had another mother come up to me and say, I want to be as peaceful as you are. And for me, that was a big moment that I had shifted enough that other people could notice that I myself was peaceful. So it's really nice. I actually go out of my way now to find things that I react to. So for many years, I didn't watch the news because it was too much. Now I want to watch the news because I want to feel what's going on inside. I want to find deeper healing still. So that's really nice. There's also a huge depth to life that I had no idea existed when I started this journey. I didn't know that you could actually hear things in your body, not just through your ears. You could feel music just just throughout your body. I mean, it makes the experience of listening to music so much nicer. But it also means, right, when you're listening to a conversation, you're able to pick up more than just the sound of their voice, right? You're picking up nuances
Mhm.
in their facial expressions, right, in
Mhm.
their body movements. Because if you can recognize it within yourself, if you can feel it, if you have that depth of self-awareness in yourself, you can see it in other people as well, right? Which makes having conversations much more enjoyable, satisfying. Also, I've released so much tension in my skull now, which is our echo chamber for our voice. So my voice has changed. I can actually sing notes that I could not sing before because I've released that tension holding my skull in a particular position, right? It's now much more malleable, much more flexible. So there's that too.
What was your health like before that pivotal moment when you realized that something needed to change, and how has your health changed since?
I used to have a lot of digestive issues. I tried
Mm.
many, many different diets, all sorts of things, but it was really associated with all that stress that I was holding inside. So that has released, not fully, because part of the journey is a deeper level of self-awareness, right? So oftentimes during this journey, I'll think, okay, I can feel something now that I couldn't feel before. And it's not because it's a new, a new pain or whatever. It's just something that was hidden before that I've now become aware of. So that's been a little bit of a mind thing to get used to along this journey. So I'm just working at a deeper level. But I've also grown 3/4 of an inch in my 50s. That doesn't happen very often. I'm taller than I've ever been in my life before. And most of us start to shrink because we're holding so much tension inside. And we tend to think the same thoughts over and over, which adds tension to those already tense neural pathways inside of us. So as we release that burden, we're actually just becoming more of our natural blueprint, right? So, I don't know what height I'm going to end up as, but I know my neck is continuing to release every day. So I would not be surprised if I grow a little bit more.
So if people are watching this on YouTube, they'll see I am kind of hunched forward. My shoulders are kind of in. My posture absolutely sucks at this moment. And so I'm at, and what I know is, and I've been feeling some stuff lately. I have so much tension throughout my shoulders and my neck. And I know emotionally I'm feeling some things these past few days. I can recognize that, right? I may try EFT after a weekend off this, or a really deep meditation, because it's been a long while since I've meditated. But um I just want to highlight for people in that when you've worked on the grief, because you say stress a lot, but I want to reiterate that what brought you to this podcast is grief. And what does grief do? It causes a stress in the body. It physically stresses the body. And not to mention the daily life that we have can be stressful, right? But I think we label things as stressful. So, how has that shifted for you in? Because I was just reading something yesterday that kind of made me think about this word stressful and stress. And it's like we are such a stressed society, but as it's at the same time, it's maintaining. It was talking about our personal management, like our management of ourselves. Like we can't, and you might be a manager of other people, and especially if you're a parent, mother, you're managing other people, right? You're managing a household. But what about your personal management? How are you managing the self? And I recognize that when I'm not managing the self, I feel more stress. I feel more stress in the body. My posture sucks, like all of these things, right? Like, and so what do you have to say to that?
Well, a lot of people, when they use the word managing, right, they also think of the word controlling. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of, even those, different spiritual methods also talk about controlling, or controlling the mind, or controlling the thoughts. My whole journey has been about noticing and allowing and releasing. So, in some sense, it could be called controlling or managing, but in terms of our modern day use of those words, it's really not that. So, yes, we want to notice. We want to notice how we're feeling during the day. a lot of us suppress. We suppress or we bypass, right? We'll have a drink, or we'll, I don't know, some people take drugs, or some people will exercise to try and avoid feeling those thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that are coming up. But when we do that, we're just keeping that energy, that emotion, that stress, that grief suppressed inside the body, because it doesn't go anywhere. It needs it needs noticing, it needs acknowledging, it needs feeling, it needs being met, right? If there's something we want to share with someone else, and the person we're talking to doesn't really listen, right? If we don't feel like we've been listened to, that feeling of needing to share that information stays inside of us until someone really meets us, really listens and hears us. That's what we need to do with the emotion inside of us. Once we really hear it, we really feel it, we allow it to be felt, to be released, it will relax and let go. So it's not really about, right, managing or controlling. It's about noticing, being aware, and just allowing ourselves to feel those feelings that are living inside of us, rather than forgetting them and move on, which most of us are programmed to do, right? That's so common, and that's what needs to change. I think even in childhood, in schools, right? If we learnt history and we allowed the children to talk about and to feel the emotions that are brought up while hearing about that history, I think that's how we change the projection or the direction of the world, actually.
That phrase, self-management, personal management, was actually used by yogi guru Sandguru. I think is how you say his name. I'm probably
Uh-huh.
saying it wrong.
I don't know.
I'll send you a link. But yeah, he's a mystic and a teacher and thought leader, and yeah, and he's got what's his program called? Inner something. It escapes my mind right now.
Okay.
I'll put it in the show notes if anybody's
I think
interested
I
in
think I
checking it
know
out.
who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
inner.
I, even him, I have to be careful with my words, because who am I? But I don't know anyone else who's developed this ability that I have. So I listen to their words, I listen to the way they talk about things, and I don't believe he has developed this ability. So I don't necessarily listen to what he says.
I'm just saying that's where the phrase came from, what I
Yeah.
was listening to
Okay.
or
Yeah.
reading the other
But
day.
maybe it's just not the best way. I mean, that's what I've looked at, a lot of these different spiritual,
Mhm.
methods, and I think originally they were probably correct, but they've been mistranslated through the years, and people tend to think that we have to control ourselves, and really it's kind of almost the opposite of that.
Well, I think it's not. I see. I hear self management, and I don't hear control. I don't get a sense of control in that way. Like, so I think it's a matter of perspective as well. Like, and we're
Right.
all going
And
to
language.
perceive. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah. We're all going to perceive what we see and what we hear and what we think or what
Yeah.
we feel differently.
But even
Um,
Buddhism, when you look at Buddhism, it's and even yoga, like the spiritual aspect of yoga, it's
mhm,
very much about controlling thoughts, controlling things you eat, just all sorts of control in there.
mhm.
And I think originally they had the right idea, but it's just been twisted over the years, and I don't think it's going to get people where they think it's going to get them.
I totally hear where you're coming from. I mean, for me, I feel like a sense of self, like I desire a sense of self mastery in a sense of whatever is going on in the world to be able to feel at peace, right?
Yeah,
I don't know.
imperturbability.
Are
Yes.
you familiar with human design?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it.
Well, I'm a manifester type, and that's a label or whatever, but it helps me make sense. It helped me make sense of a lot of things in my life. But the not self theme of a manifester is anger, and the um the opposite of that is right. Right is peace. And so I know I'm feeling aligned in what I'm doing, what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling when I'm at peace. So I'm starting to recognize, and I've been in my experiment with human design and in learning these things about myself for, it's been a couple years, but it's really helped me to open my eyes to have an awareness, right, of when I'm, what what not feeling peace feels like in my body, like the tension in my neck and my slouching and my turning inward, because this is what we do when we are just walk, just, you go to church, you can go to church and you see, I see so many people with their, you know, your shoulders go up like this, you're not relaxed, right? You're in the grocery store line or whatever, you can just see people's posture, how they carry themselves, it's
And they're not
written
aware.
all over them.
Yeah, they're not aware of it. I mean, most of us,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
Most of us are not aware of it. There is so much hidden in our subconscious mind that we are just not aware of. And that's, that's why you have to go down this road a little bit
Mm-hmm.
to start realizing some things that have been hidden in your subconscious mind. And then you start to realize, oh my goodness, there's so much more. Let me keep going and
Mm-hmm.
uncovering what's in there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think grief is just, and stress is just written all over us. You know, you can see it in other, I see it clearly in other people, and I can recognize it within myself. And so how has, like, what's life like now? Like on the daily, are you still doing EFT? Are you still, like, how much time have you devoted to this practice? Are you teaching other people? Are you teaching, have you taught your kids? Like all the questions.
Well, I used it on my kids when they were young. My youngest son used to have nightmares, and I'd just go and tap on him. Didn't need any words because the emotions were already in his body. So I'd just tap on him, and then it'd say, "Okay, Mum, I can go back to sleep now." And I would just, leave the room, and he'd go back to sleep. So they know that it works. They just have a lot of resistance because, children often do. So I'm hoping one day they'll come back to it, or at least do some kind of shadow work to, because I didn't change until they were, 6 and 10, something like that. So they have traumas inside of them from those early years for sure. I do still use EFT, not as much because I have these other things I can use. I mean, I feel inside multiple times a day, like many, many, many times a day, 50, 100 times a day. And that many times I will have something release in my neck or my head. So it's almost automatic to me for me now. It just, first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is like, okay, where's my neck going to crack? And I will just move and allow it to crack. So it's very much a part of me now, and it wasn't in those early years. I started doing it more and more because it felt so good. This tension's been stored inside of us for, for me, for decades, and it felt good to release it. So I just kept doing it. Let's see. I do share the information. I have a YouTube channel that has different videos, and I've got if you go to my website, annhince.com, I've got a PDF download of my cheat sheet, a 2-page PDF with, all the basics of EFT, so anyone can learn to do it. And let's see, what were the other questions there?
Yeah, so with the kids, how it's like physically. I'm curious too, like with food.
Oh,
Um,
right. You asked about my day, like how I feel
yeah.
different. And my days are peaceful. I enjoy my days now. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I can always find peace. And that was not the case before at all. So I'm happy wherever I go, whatever I'm doing. Some people will sometimes say, are we looking forward to going on this trip that, you're going to go on? It's like, well, that's 2 weeks in the future. I'm not thinking about that. I'm peaceful right now. So kind of time has shifted as well. I think of it differently, feel it differently. So that's really nice. I mean, my goal was inner peace. So, I'm not fully there yet because I know there's a lot more tension still. And I won't feel total peace on the inside until my body is totally aligned, and I've got a long way to go yet on that. So, but I know what I'm working on. I know what I'm working towards. So and then you mentioned food. I did lots of different diets along my way before I found EFT. I mean, all sorts: live food, vegan, macrobiotic, vegetarian, just all sorts. And I let go of all my beliefs around that. Not all of them. I still eat organic whenever I can. And I cook my own food mostly. But I've let go of so much tension and all those beliefs around I should have this or I shouldn't have this, or if I have this, I'm not going to feel right. I've let go of all of that, so I can pretty much eat whatever I want now, which is really nice. And I have done discussions online, with people who think you should be vegan. They're so adamant about it, and it's that being adamant, it's that tension, it's that judgment of other people. That's what's holding dis-ease
Mhm.
inside of their body. And I know, because I was there too. I was vegan for many years, and I remember having that judgment, and that's tension, that's dis-ease inside of ourselves. And when we're judging someone else, we're hurting ourselves. So got to find that judgment, notice it, feel it, allow it, and let it release. And that actually releases the dis-ease from inside of us.
Part of my tension is um, just having this experience lately where I had signed up for this program, and the fad right now is protein, 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 and you need a obscene amount of protein. And what I found though is and I this is not like this has been going on about 5 months now, like, and I've just switched a different program and still trying to maintain like the tracking and the weights, and but what I found, like, just in the last couple days, truly, like over the weekend. So this is very new, and this is why this tension has actually lightened today, to be honest. Like, this is true story. I was feeling heavy. I was feeling so heavy, and I was feeling like my body is screaming at me like this is not for me right now. And I was so adamant of, this is what I need. I need this person to tell me what, how much I'm supposed to be eating, and I need to do these workouts and be so regimented. And that is so against my body type, like my body as like, even as a manifester. This is where human design has helped me too, and realizing that my desires are going to change depending on my where I am energetically. And I'm more of like in this rest cycle right now, which has corresponded to this program I'm working on, which I've completely just like, I put it on the table and I haven't looked at it. Like, I put it down and I haven't looked at it in like over a week, 2 weeks, actually, probably. And I'm like, oh my God, this is what's happening. I'm in this rest cycle. Why am I pushing myself to do this program? I need to listen to my body. I need to honor my body. And as soon as I've done that, as of yesterday afternoon, I feel so much better today. It is crazy how our body, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a perfect example of what we're talking about, of how our bodies are always communicating with us. We just, the judgment or the self-criticism, or, I should be doing this and I should be doing that, or like you said, of other people too.
Yeah, and we forget that we're so connected, right? That was part of my journey. I realized how it's all connected. So you could access that tension in your shoulders and your neck through words, right? Through memories, through beliefs, right? I believe that I should be doing something, or
Mhm.
controlling, or giving someone else control over my body.
Yes, that
So you can
agency. I lost my sense of agency.
Yes. So that is connected to the tension in your shoulders. Or you could tap, if you're using EFT, you could tap directly on, I have tension in my shoulders, right? You could feel the tension in your shoulders. It doesn't matter which way you access it, right? Whether it's through words, emotions, or through physical tension itself, it's still accessing the tension in your shoulders.
Mhm.
because it's all connected. I know a lot of people are concerned, like, a doctor will say, well, it's all in your head, right? And some people get offended by that. But if we take that to be true, okay, so what is it I'm thinking or feeling? And if we know that those thoughts and feelings are connected to the physical, then we can work with those words and with those memories and with those emotions. And that's what EFT did for me. It was kind of those outer layers. Okay, let me go through the memories of those traumas and talk through them and tap through them. And what I didn't realize when I started to do that, that I was affecting the physical, because I didn't have that depth of self awareness. I have that depth now. So I know that it's all connected. So even if you don't know that you're affecting the physical, I can tell you, if you're doing EFT, even on words and memories, you are affecting the physical.
Um, I was going to ask you a question and it totally escaped me now. Um, oh, shoot. I was so wrapped up in what you were saying. Um, oh, I had a question. Do you have a meditation then that guides people through that process of interconnecting?
And not as such. I mean, I have videos on YouTube about the different steps, about the feeling the feelings. There's one
Okay.
about feeling feelings. There's one about going inside. Um, it takes work to go inside, though, so I'm not sure anyone could do that right off. But they could feel the feelings. Empaths are very good at picking up and
Mm-hmm.
sensing their feelings inside their bodies, so that they could do that. So yes, I do have a video series that takes people deeper into relaxation, where they can actually notice their depth of awareness. Because I find people don't know, right? We don't know what we don't know. So we don't know how far we can go beyond where we are right now. So as I've gone through this journey, I've realized there's different things that have changed in me, right? Like being able to feel music within the body, right? Rather than hear it with just your ears. So I've recognized some different things that change. And so I take people through those, right, to notice. I mean, even just simply noticing how reactionary you are, right? If you're still reactionary, if you're still triggered by things or
Mm-hmm.
easily triggered by things, if people say you're highly strung, then you don't have a great depth of awareness. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. But it means there's so much more you can find, so much more depth to life that you can find by doing this inner work.
And I think what people don't realize is the deeper goal of this work, doing the work and looking into yourself and connecting with the self, is that I think so many of us come into this life and we leave this life not ever realizing our own potential because of it.
Absolutely. My brother died a few years ago. He was adopted too, right? So he had a
Mm-hmm.
different story from me. He was adopted from a different family. But whereas I went one direction, he went into the way my parents were. So he drank
Mm-hmm.
and he smoked his whole life. And I actually tapped with him a couple of months before he died. I went to his hospital room and he and I tapped through some of our collective childhood traumas, and it was really interesting to talk through some of those things that we'd been through together. And to have him experience EFT, I had to tap on him because he didn't have the energy to tap. But after a few minutes of tapping on one thing in particular, when we were at boarding school, when we left him the first term at boarding school and we drove away and we were heading to Hong Kong from England. It was a long way away. We left him screaming in the driveway. He was just screaming for us to stay. And he remembered that. It was so clear to him. And we tapped on it. And he said it had kind of receded more in his mind through those couple of minutes of tapping. So, I think if he had wanted to do this work, he
Mm-hmm.
could have totally changed his life, but it wasn't on his path. It wasn't something he was ready to do. So, some of us don't, and some of us do.
Do you have a relationship now with your birth mother
I do. I went to see her at Christmas time. Yes. Yeah, I've only
for
met
the
her a few
first time?
times. No, I met her. I mean, I met her when I was 17 for the
Yep.
first time. And then Then on our honeymoon, when I was 24, she came over when my first son was born, and a couple of other times. So yeah, I've seen her less than 10 times in my life, but it's been nice. And we have technology now, so I call her once a month. So yeah, and she came over one time and we actually tapped together on my birth, on her giving me up. So I think that was healing for both of us.
Did she ever tell you why?
Yes, she was 26. She'd been engaged to my father, and they had this one time event after she'd told him that she was leaving. It was that night, and she left the next morning. She got on a boat from New Zealand to head back to England, and she found out she was pregnant on the way. So yeah, she was a single mother, and she just thought that I would be better off with a complete family.
Mm. Do you have any other siblings? Half siblings?
I do. I have two half siblings from her, and I just found out who my birth father was a couple of years ago through Ancestry, and he never knew I existed, and he died a few years ago. So I have a half sibling, a half sister through him. So that was fun.
Wow.
I met her at Christmas time too, the first time ever.
Was that healing for you to, it's like you find out you're and I don't know what this is like, but so if you can elaborate, that would be wonderful. But like, you almost feel like, did you almost feel like you didn't know a half of you? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes,
you know,
absolutely. Yeah, there was a palpable relief when I first met my birth mother. I mean, and again, it was tension that I had not known that I was holding probably since I was 13, right? But I didn't know it was there until I could feel it release when I met her at 17. And the same thing about finding out about my birth dad. I didn't know I was missing something, right? Until there was some relief when I found out, and that felt really good.
well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've had my own ahas as I've heard you speak. And, thank you for letting me share a little bit of my own personal experience throughout
Thank you
this.
for
But
doing that.
yeah, I will put links to your cheat sheet, the YouTube, your website in the show notes. But well, let me ask you this first. Is there anything that you want to share that you didn't get a chance to?
I don't think so. We covered all sorts of things. Yeah. I mean, the thing I love to share at the end is the depths of life, because there's so many people who are depressed these days or considering suicide. And I did too as a teenager. But there is just so much you don't know yet if that's what you're thinking. So I encourage people to go down this journey and realize the depth to life, right? So that you can enjoy life more. There's just so much enjoyment that you have not yet found. So I encourage you to do that.
I do want to share too, and ask the art. So anyone that's not is only listening to this and not seeing it, there's some artwork on your wall beside you. Is that your artwork?
It is, yes. That's my more
Wow.
recent artwork. That's been a journey, right? I started out doing pencil portraits and black and white. I drew in black and white for years, and
Interesting.
then I became able to feel into colors, and I started using colors more, and started going less detailed, right, and more just what felt right. And yeah, I can feel into colors more now. That I mean, I had no idea that that was possible before. But I mean, I wear blue now all the time because just blue feels so peaceful to me, and I feel a repulsion from white. It's like it reflects, it pushes energy away from it, which I find really interesting given that people tend to think of it as a spiritual color. I
Hmm.
don't. I kind of almost don't see white cars. I mean, I know they're a car, I know they're there. Don't
Hmm.
worry, I drive safely. But if I have a friend who has a white car, and I just don't see her. I'll see the colored cars. I'll see blues and reds and yellows, but it's that's been an interesting part of this journey too. So many just weird changes.
Well, I just want to highlight that your wall is purple. You have a lot of purple in your artwork. And the third eye chakra is purple.
Yeah, this is a colorful room. I've also got a green roof with yellow highlights and three different colored lights there. There's a red, blue, and green. So, yeah, I try and keep white out of this room. So, yeah. So people, I do have my artwork. I have a little shop on my website
Okay.
with products from my artwork. If anyone wants to go and have a look, they're very colorful.
Well, I
But if
just love
someone
that bottom one there.
thank you.
Really
If
pretty.
someone wants to find me, you can contact me on my website, annhince.com, or I'm very active on Facebook. So you can interact with me there. I try and post something every day, and I'm trying to explain, my story through other people's quotes and that kind of thing. I try and add an explanation to things. And also, I'm learning how to put on retreats. So, our first retreat, a friend and I are going to put on retreats that's called Liberation Beyond Loss, which is going
Mm,
to be specifically for women who've lost a mother. Right? We're going to do this work, this inner work, the tapping and the trauma release work around that loss and that grief. So, if someone wants to check that out too, that'll be next year. So,
amazing. And I'll put links, like I said, in the show notes where people can connect with you and find all the goodness that you offer.
thank you.
And thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your story. And I think a lot of examples of all kinds of different grief in your story. And so thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thanks for the great conversation.
And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.